When Eddie Hearn first rose to prominence on the British boxing scene, supplanting Frank Warren as the number one promoter in the country, I made a number of videos at the time explaining why he was able to do this. And it is beyond the superficial reasons, such as he inherited a promotional company from his dad who was already very successful, and the fact that he had this exclusive deal with Sky. There was also the fact that Eddie Hearn was more forward thinking and more in touch with the youth in society than the older promoters like Frank Warren, Frank Maloney, etc. And an example of this was the way that Eddie Hearn utilized social media, not only to promote his fights, but also to promote his brand, because he made himself far more accessible than the likes of Frank Warren, engaging with the public, both on social media and at Eddie Hearn's press conferences and open workouts, public workouts, and so on that he would do in promotion for his fights. And Eddie Hearn is a very charismatic guy. He's got banter, he's funny, and all this kind of thing. In addition to that, Eddie Hearn, up until a certain point at least, had a good reputation among fighters. This is why he was able to sign so much talent so quickly. Again, it wasn't just because of the exclusive deal with Sky, because when he went to America, he signed a lot of talent there as well. No, it was the reputation he had among fighters, and particularly when you compare it to the reputation that Frank Warren had among fighters. Because Frank Warren, over the decades he'd been involved in boxing, had some very tumultuous relationships with fighters that he worked with, acrimonious breakups and so on, some of which ended up in court cases. And Frank Warren earned the name Frank the Writ, which that was given to him by the British press because of his willingness to sue people, including newspapers, and he threatened to sue many people, not just newspapers, boxers, newspapers, even people on social media, just random people on social media have been threatened with legal action by representatives of Frank Warren or people who claim to be representatives of him. So Warren had this reputation among fighters. There are well-known cases like with Joe Calzaghe. That's a case that Frank Warren actually lost in court, one of the few times, but also with the likes of Ricky Burns and numerous other fighters over the years. When Eddie Hearn came onto the scene, he wasn't getting involved in these court cases and legal battles with fighters. He was often dealing with fighters on a fight-by-fight basis, so there was no written contract. So when the fighter wanted to go their own way, they just up and left. And so again, he managed to build a reputation, and he managed to actually separate himself from the other promoters due to having this different approach to the fans, different approach to the business, and different approach to the fighters. But the longer Eddie Hearn has been in the game, the more he starts to become like the Frank Warrens and the other promoters and lose the very things that made him successful in the first place, lose the very things that separated him from the other promoters and made him unique to some extent. And I say this in relation to the situation with Lawrenece Okolie, who is seemingly in a legal battle with his promoter Eddie Hearn. The dispute is over the number of fights Lawrenece Okolie has left on his contract. Okolie seems to believe that he's out of contract now, whereas Eddie Hearn has insisted, including publicly, that no, Lawrenece Okolie has one fight left on the contract. And this has led to this apparent stalemate. Lawrenece Okolie has taken to social media several times now, once a few months ago, where he put up a tweet which seemed to insinuate that Eddie Hearn was some type of slave master. And more recently, he put up a tweet, again, seemingly aimed at Eddie Hearn, which insinuates something similar. I think in the wake of this Conor Benn scandal, and it is a scandal, the last thing Eddie Hearn needs is more bad press. Again, to repeat myself, one of the main factors that allowed Eddie Hearn to rise to prominence and take over the position as number one promoter in Britain is the fact that he had this good rapport with the public and this good reputation among fighters. His reputation with the public has soured for various reasons. One, his move to DAZN in the UK, resulting in all these pay-per-views when the public were initially assured that DAZN would be a pay-per-view killer. And then more recently, the situation with Conor Benn. The public do not look favorably upon Eddie Hearn with regards to the way that he's handled all that. And then his reputation among fighters has taken a serious knock as well. Yes, because of this Lawrenece Okolie situation, but there are many other fighters that have left Eddie Hearn. Their departures haven't been as acrimonious as this one with Lawrenece Okolie, but several fighters expressed their dissatisfaction with the job Eddie Hearn was doing for them. So as an outsider, somebody who has no knowledge of the inner workings of Matchroom's business, no knowledge of the pressure that DAZN might or might not be putting on Eddie Hearn to get a monetarily favorable resolution out of the Lawrenece Okolie situation. As someone who's not privy to all that, from a PR perspective, as a boxing fan who at least has some understanding from a fan's perspective of why Eddie Hearn was able to be as successful as he was, I think that Eddie Hearn should cut his losses, and that means cutting Lawrenece Okolie loose without having him fight one more time to see out the contract. I think that Eddie Hearn's reputation at this stage cannot afford to be damaged any further. I think that he and perhaps his broadcaster, I don't know, may be underestimating how damaging this could be by way of signing new talent and so on. I think that Eddie Hearn has forgotten the things that made him successful in the first place. I think he's lost his way. I think he got overconfident, complacent, and started to believe his own hype. Eddie Hearn in the past has talked about how the other promoters, the older promoters, seem so bitter and how he hopes he doesn't become bitter like that over time. But aren't we seeing that unfold right before our eyes? Another thing I forgot to mention earlier on is the fact that Eddie Hearn had a good relationship with the media. And I did mention the public because a lot of people with YouTube channels go to Eddie Hearn's events. I'm not just talking about the fights, I mean public events. Turn up with a camera or a smartphone and they can get an interview with Eddie Hearn. So I include them in media. But he made himself very, very accessible. Now, of course, we're hearing situations where Eddie Hearn isn't allowing the media, either the mainstream media or people with smartphones and YouTube channels, to do interviews with him or to ask him any questions. This is the kind of thing we expected from the Frank Warrens of the world in the past. But now we're getting it from Eddie Hearn. So he's gone from somebody who managed to change British boxing for the better, a fresh new face and a different outlook and a different approach, to now being just like all the others. And look, I'm not making any judgment regarding who's in the right and who's in the wrong with this Lawrenece Okolie situation. All I can tell you is that fighters are going to look at it, at least some fighters, and they're going to say, I don't like it. Okolie is saying that he got mistreated by Eddie Hearn and kept on the shelf during his prime years when he wanted to fight because Eddie Hearn wouldn't let him out of his contract when he only had one fight left and there was this dispute over it. And again, some of you may feel that it's Lawrenece Okolie who's in the wrong, but look at the big picture. Is it worth Eddie Hearn going through all this if it's going to damage his reputation among fighters? Because he needs to be signing new talent. But most of the new talent these days seems to be going to Ben Shalom and Frank Warren, in the United Kingdom at least. Eddie Hearn isn't doing anything to set himself apart from these people anymore. You could say that pressure changes people, but I don't think it does change people necessarily. I think it just reveals latent aspects of their personality, traits that were always there beneath the surface. Pressure just brings them to the fore. And I think that's what we're seeing now with Eddie Hearn. So in conclusion, I think that it's best for Eddie Hearn from a PR perspective at least to just cut Lawrenece Okolie loose. From a business perspective, I don't know the ins and outs of the contract. And I'm also cognizant of the fact that as a businessman, you don't want people feeling like they can disregard your contracts, right? You might think that if you allow Lawrenece Okolie to leave without having his final fight, then other fighters are going to try to do it with you as well. Maybe they already have done that with Eddie Hearn and he's let certain things go. Maybe this was him putting his foot down, whereas in the past, perhaps he'd let certain things slide. I don't know. And of course, as a selfish boxing fan, I want this situation resolved as soon as possible so Lawrenece Okolie can kick on and partake in unification bouts I also tend to side with fighters more so than promoters because of the fact that I did box myself, but also because I hate seeing a fighter's prime years go to waste. We've seen that many times in the past when you've had these types of legal disputes between fighter and promoter. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Those are just my thoughts on the situation. Give me your take in the comment section below.
If you're tired of the biased narratives and mass censorship on mainstream platforms, and you want to be part of a community of critical thinkers who love free speech just as much as you do, then come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide variety of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&As, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high quality MP3. We've also got an element group where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. Unlike Discord, it has full end-to-end encryption, is decentralized, and is 100% censorship free. You can also send voice notes as well as much larger audio and video files than you can on Discord. So come and sign up on Patreon. There's no contract, there's no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a cup of coffee. So I'll see you over there. I'm out.